All right, so we're recording now.
All right, guys, today is the 19th of January, and we're meeting just for a work session. In lieu of introductions and roll calls, I would like everyone just to introduce themselves and please share one thing you look forward to in the Montana State Library this year. So I'm Dalton, chair of the Montana State Library, and I look forward to continuing to push forward the mission and vision and the excited growth of and positive feedback we continue to hear from our peers at the Capitol Rotunda. So that's what I'm looking forward to most. Peggy, can you go next?
Peggy Taylor. I'm in Whitefish today. It's cloudy and has been for days. And I'm looking forward to having more in person and seeing how the legislature works when we come down in February for the legislative night. And I've been enjoying watching the hearings and such.
Robin, you're next on my screen.
Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm Robin Scribner. I'm in Geraldine today, Geraldine, Montana. I am looking forward to us being a cohesive unit moving forward and just getting everybody working together and having a great year.
Tammy.
Hi, everybody. I'm in Bozeman. I agree. I'm looking forward to finding out more about what the legislature's doing. I'm looking forward to getting to know Patricia. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I really enjoy getting to know you better.
Thanks, Tammy. Patricia?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm in Havre, MSU Northern. It's a beautiful sunny day up here. And I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you better and just learning so much. So yeah, looking forward to February's legislative night also.
And Tom.
Yes, Tom Burnett. I live in Bozeman, and I would look forward to dropping by some more of the local libraries.
And that's all for the commission, I believe. Members of the staff who are with us today.
Hi, everyone. Jenny Stepp with the State Library. I'm looking forward to continuing through the legislative session. Hopefully the positive momentum that we're seeing for our legislation continues.
Hi, Evan Hammer, State Library. Also looking forward to the end of the legislative session.
And I'm Melissa Briggs, and Evan stole mine. I was going to say the last day of session, but we can both have it.
Lighthizer, admin specialist.
I think that's everyone. All right, guys. So we have an hour and an agenda packed, but I just want to do one update for everyone. I've asked Tom and Patricia to join subcommittees at the State Library, and I've asked Tom to join the Finance Subcommittee, and I've asked Patricia to join the Network Advisory Committee. At our last meeting, I learned a lot about the skill set that they have in their tenure and in their professional careers, and I think that those skills will lend beautifully to these committees. So thank you both for your service, and just an update for everyone there. So first on our agenda, Jenny, is the commission bylaws. And
I'll just kind of walk through our hope and intent for today. At our meeting in December and then in the training the following day, we talked about a need to review the bylaws. We for new commissioners, February is our typical time for the commission to review those bylaws and either amend or accept the existing bylaws. So this is the appropriate time to be doing that. During the executive session, we talked about wanting to amend the bylaws to potentially include information about who conducts the state librarian evaluation, and we also discussed who is responsible for setting the agenda. I think those are both two appropriate things to include in your commission bylaws, so that's clear. And then in the follow-up training, we talked about creating a public participation policy for our meetings, something that we don't currently have at the state library. So we put out a call for examples of policy documents for us to consider. And then Genevieve researched other similar organizations within the state to have examples for you to consider when thinking about some of the changes that we might want to propose to help us function more effectively. So I think first, just considering the commission bylaws, and then we can have a conversation about the creation of a public participation policy after that.
Thanks, Jenny.
I want to potentially propose a couple of amendments to your bylaws for you to consider and discuss. First, under one meetings, and it's actually supposed to be right. Anyway, under the meetings, the quorums, rules, and attendance. There's language in the example from the Board of Regents bylaws about how the agenda is set. It talks about members of the Board of Regents or officials from the various campuses submitting agenda items to the commissioner 4 weeks ahead of time. And that the commissioner and the chair of the Board of Regents can waive that timeline. I don't know if we need to be that official, but I like the idea of having recommendations for inclusion of items on the agenda come through me and the chair, so that there's agreement on what is then set on the agenda. And then a lot of times you'll actually see on some bylaws sort of what a standard agenda looks like, that it includes a consent agenda, current business, past business, etc. I don't know if we want to get that formal in our bylaws or not, but I would throw out that suggestion for discussion.
Has there been any feedback on development for Robert's Rules of Order by the state? Is there going to be a set standard that they're wanting meetings to be ran?
I've not heard that they're going to have a set standard for how the meetings are run or their agendas.
Okay, thank you.
This is Tammy. May I ask a question, Dalton?
Yes, Tammy, go ahead.
Okay, under this item agenda, I did have three or just questions, Jenny. We had asked who sets the agenda, and I didn't know if that was you and Dalton or you and staff and Dalton. I don't know if we need it, but we can take an item off the consent agenda if we want discussion on it, but I don't know if that needs to be in there or not. I also had that, do we need something a commissioner can ask for an item on the agenda? I know that can open up a whole problem, but I don't think it would. And then the action versus discussion, how is that determined? So I guess two of those are together, who sets it, and the action versus discussion, it must be set also with you. And then again, taking something off the consent agenda by a board member to discuss, or asking for an item to be put on the agenda, that can be done, correct? Or do we need to have something? All those are just questions. I have no idea.
Yeah, good questions. And I think we have some practices, but they're not documented. And so, I think what we're wanting to do is make sure that they are documented so that we all are in agreement about what those processes are. So in practice, we have a consent agenda. And at the start of that agenda item, the chair asks if anyone wants to remove any of those items from the consent agenda for further discussion. So that's in practice. We could certainly put something like that into more formal bylaws if you feel like that would be helpful for you.
I don't need to know if it's necessary, if it's being done. I would, I guess, maybe don't ask Tom, as Tom has more experience. My experience with all my years on the school board is that we did have that any board member could take it off, which we're doing. I don't know if people want to leave it practice or policy, but Jenny, I think that's a great suggestion for today's work session. Should it be practice or policy? Formal or informal? What do you all think?
Mr. Chairman,
Just leave it informal?
Tom, what would you like to add?
I would prefer the informal route. I don't see problems with, of course, I don't have a long history on the commission, but my personality is to not formalize things unless there's a need. And so that's kind of where I'd weigh in on that. If it's been working, we could ISO 9000 this to the nth degree, but we may not need to.
I like the way you think.
My philosophy is that keep it simple, keep it short. I think that people end up writing policy around exceptions and it just grows and grows and grows. And it's not a good idea. So who sets the agenda in action versus discussion?
So the state librarian and staff develop the agenda and share it with the commission. That's practice. Again, that's not articulated in any kind of policy. So I'm curious your thoughts about whether or not you would want that stated, and also a process for which commissioners could ask for items to be added to the agenda. I think my only consideration there is that staff be given enough time to prepare for an agenda item. So the length of time we would need in order to make sure that we could adequately address agenda items.
Dalton, I have a comment.
Please speak.
Okay, there's a listing, or one of our documents is the Montana State Library Commission guidelines and lists the chair's duties. And it does say in there, develops meeting agendas in cooperation with the state librarian. So we do have that portion written down. So.
And the practice as it stands now is, I don't know how it's been done with other chairs, but I would assume it hasn't changed much, is as Jenny shared, she and staff follow conversations at the commission and use that to design the agenda for the next meeting. And then I've received the draft narrative of the agenda, looked at it, provided my feedback, and when I provide my feedback, what I've done historically is went back and looked at the past 2 years I've served on and looked at discussions and reviewed what we talked about to make sure that we're continuing to do the same practices we've done in the past. So that's the work I've done. And if I have feedback for Jenny, I share it with her, and then she publishes that.
How far in advance do you usually get that, Dalton?
It's usually 2 weeks.
Okay.
At least I feel like
Yeah.
within
2 to
that
4 weeks.
range.
And Jenny, you made a comment, you usually share it with the commission, but you met with the chair.
The commission chair, right? Yeah.
Right. Seems like the process works.
Do you commissioners feel like you have an opportunity to request agenda items appropriately?
Mr. Chair, Tom here. If reading through the bylaws, it occurred to me that if I had something to bring to the agenda, that I would call you, Chair, or email you and copy Jenny and suggest that go on the agenda. That's the way I was envisioning adding things to agenda, and I think the bylaws allow for that. And it seems like a reasonable approach if others agree.
I'm in support.
That makes sense to me as well.
I think it's a great practice. My experience, the Board of Regents had quite a bit more than that. And then also their reconsideration, not for 6 months and only if a prevailing. That sounded to me as if they've had a problem with people wanting to add too many things, and they were trying to cut that down. I have not known of a board member adding an agenda item in the year I've been on or whatever I've been on. Is that happen very often, Jenny?
No,
It does not.
not to my recollection.
It does not.
No.
Yeah, I would not think it happened very often, but you are open to it if it needed to.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
I'm totally comfortable leaving it. And if a problem doesn't exist, don't address it.
And then Tammy, your other question was about action versus discussion. So we have a typical process that we follow when we are bringing policy documents, resolutions, other kinds of similar requests to the commission that require action. It's our practice to bring an item as a draft for discussion at one meeting and then ask for action at a subsequent meeting in order to allow time for you to ask for questions, follow-up information, revisions, input from advisory councils, etc. So that's our current practice. And then, of course, Robert's rules allow for any action to be tabled for a subsequent meeting if the commission feels like you're not ready to take action, if something is noted as an action item on your agenda.
Dalton, may I make a point here?
Please, Tammy, speak freely.
Okay. I think that, and not wanting to revisiting the past, but that was the problem with my initial meetings. The first meeting I ever came to, there were 2 action items. And again, I was new, but the logo item and the value statement were action items, and people besides me also felt like that was sort of, especially the value statement, which had not been reviewed before, that needed to be on before it became an action item. And of course, we reversed and fixed that. I don't know how you address that, except to say it was a learning opportunity. And my experience from the last 5 months is that we have learned, and that we probably would not, the staff and the board would probably not bring action items we had not had a chance to discuss or look at. Now, I understand I would separate those out because the logo item had been on before. So I would leave that. But I would talk about the value issue totally separate. The value statement issue sort of, wow, here it is. So I guess that would be my concern, is just an awareness. I'm against putting things in policy that don't have to be. I think we create a monster. But I do want there to be an awareness that action items for the board should not come kind of out of the blue. Does anybody have a viewpoint on that?
I think you're correct. And I guess if it's an action item, it's not brought at the, it needs to be brought as an information item before it's an action item.
Well said.
So in February or in December, we would see an information item, and then in February, that would then be the action item.
Unless situation does not allow for that timeline, but that doesn't need to be in, that can be practice, correct?
Correct. And I think we could do an emergency vote too, if we needed to, or meet at an alternate date for public notice. We can make it work, but
Mr. Chairman,
please, Tom.
Robert's Rules of Order and our present bylaws would not preclude a motion to act on something at any meeting, as long as the public had a chance to be invited to the meeting. Am I correct?
It's my understanding that it would have to, for action to be taken, it would need to have been put on the agenda, or at least been made public notice within 48 hours.
That sounds right. Yeah. Okay, so that would be the limiting factor, is the 48-hour possibility or window.
That's my understanding.
But there's an emergency thing around it.
I think we still have to give 48 hours. At least that's what my understanding is, what we learned at our last training with Dan Clark. Anything that with action has to go through, the ability for public comment has to go through anything that action item will be decided on. So we need to give reasonable notice.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about that. Is there a threshold for significance for that? Or could we say, we're going to have donuts at the end of this meeting, and that doesn't need any public notice? So what kinds of actions are necessary to be noticed properly?
Typically, it's any kind of policy, expenditure of public funds, decisions that we might make that might impact our partners, like the Montana Land Information Plan that establishes the priority for the grant program that local governments will be applying for, those kinds of things that will have direct impact on the people and partners that we are serving.
Thanks, Jenny. I just want everyone to take a moment and recognize and welcome Superintendent Arnson to the conversation today. Welcome.
Welcome.
Superintendent, we were just discussing the process for action items during meetings, and to bring you up to where we're at is it's understanding that anything that's an action item must have 48 hours of notice to the public.
Yes, sir. The other aspect is in notice of information, because I was here when you were discussing that. And I believe that's really an important aspect, that informational items get in front of us. The only other thing that I'd like to add, in knowing that the interim budget committee chair, which of course you're all under section E here of House Bill 2, is requiring metrics and goals. And I believe in our 12-page document with all the things that our agency does, I believe that's vital for our commission to recognize the future path forward. And that's this discussion of information, all leading to a vote based on metrics, increasing patrons, increasing use of all the things that the library does, and not just increasing use, but the purpose in each one of those uses. So I think that's something that we really need to be aware of, is what is that test of a metric? And that might be another work session, Jenny, that you may want to put into play to see what are the goals. And I think they should be annual goals, or at least, because we're going to be going through the interim process and all of that, what are the goals based on the ability for the dollars to flow into the state library to be able to be recognized in the outcomes.
I think that's a great suggestion, Elsie. If the commission's open, we could certainly do that in a work session, review our current work plan goals. We of course had to submit upcoming biennium goals, and as the superintendent said, we'll be having discussions in our budget hearing about the metrics that we use to evaluate those goals. So the commission likes that idea. I would suggest after our budget hearing, we have that opportunity to have that deeper discussion. The other thing that I've asked of staff is that we make sure we have some kind of additional accompanying information about the agenda items. Obviously, if there's an action item, you're going to have information about what action is requested and why. But even for informational items, presentations, having information prepared for you about why this item is of importance to be brought to the commission, what we want the commission to understand from the presentation. We know Commissioner Burnett has an interest in the funding behind these projects. And so in the future, you'll see information about the project funding associated with these various presentations. And to your point, Superintendent, we can certainly include information about the outcomes we expect from these initiatives and the metrics that we're using to evaluate that.
This is Tammy. May I ask a question, Dawn?
Certainly, Tammy.
Okay, for me, the agenda items that we were discussing are almost complete. I just have that one hanging about as Tom said, what is an action versus whatever. And I still would like Elsie's opinion on if something isn't on the action item, have you had that happen? Where something's not on the action, but due to something in the legislature, just a budgeting problem or a grant coming in, something you need action, how do you handle it? And then I guess my next question, the first thing I had for today that I was curious was that I noticed these other boards had an objective, and we don't have that. And maybe that goes back to what Elsie is talking about, and maybe it's not necessary, but it struck me that under our bylaws, we did not have an objective for the board or the commission. So could we hear from Elsie? Elsie, what do you do if something does it ever happen?
Well, for sure. In the bylaws, you know, on page 2, I do believe of the bylaws under meeting, quorum, rules, and attendance, it says that the commission shall meet 6 times, but they do give that allowance, except in cases of financial emergency. I don't know if the word financial, you know, is the only thing that would limit an extended board meeting. But I believe if you follow and you notice and everything, that even if it is, you can have the meeting the following in 48 hours after that, or the following week, in order for that emergency situation to occur. I believe the thing that I would seek as a board member and in all my work is that the information flow is recognized. In other words, you don't want to act on an item if you don't have the information. So I believe our bylaws allow for that emergency allowance. We just have to hit 6 times a year. That answers the one question. You had another question, Tammy.
Oh, that was about objectives. The other case I have on, not on emergency, but on information. At the
Okay.
last meeting, Tom and I had a motion not to approve the electronic policy until we saw the legal opinion. And then that was defeated, which is fine. But that was an informational. We wanted information before the discussion was, the action was taken. I don't know what would have been a more appropriate way to get that information. We did make the motion, it did fail, I understand that, and I'm comfortable now that it went on. But it would have been helpful to me to have those legal inputs before that discussion in front of us, not just to be told in one line that our legal input said children cannot be restricted in what they see in libraries. But that's an example of wanting more information, and Was that an acceptable way to do that? Is there, I
Well,
mean,
I
it
think,
failed, but
yeah, I think the legal concern is also a budgetary item as well. There is not a legal entity right now. Have you, Jenny, have we contracted, the commission contracted with ASLB, the Agency Legal Services Bureau?
We do have an agreement with them, yes. In
Mhm.
terms of the actual contract, it
Mhm.
was going to be double the price of having a staff attorney.
Mhm.
And so we
Wow.
did not enter into a contract. So
Mhm.
we have an MOU. So in that particular instance, what would help me is when we bring an item for discussion, you know, ask for that kind of information. Legal information is obviously a little bit different because we're not necessarily going to post it as part of our meeting materials, because that is legal guidance from Agency Legal Services on behalf of the commission to the commission. But I've received legal guidance from our attorney about how I can share that information with you so that you have it ahead of time. And so I'm happy to follow that practice so that you have that information ahead of an action request. And then, of course, if it's non-legal information that you're asking for, we can provide that information. But having that discussion item first and making requests of us at that time allows us to have that information to you in time for you to be able to take that action. With regard to
can we,
legal
wait, can
requests,
we visit that?
Yeah.
I don't think that in fact is practice. In fact, Dan Clark said, when you made that comment that sometimes our attorney doesn't want those shared, he said he felt that was a violation of open meeting law. He felt like a lawyer can't tell us we can't see the legal opinion. And secondly,
That's right.
I personally would not want to be making an action item if there has been a legal opinion, unless I have that legal opinion in front of me to read. I think it's, in this day and age, it's just a given. Does anybody else feel that way?
I think what we could do to correct this, and Jenny, maybe you already have found the solution, I'm not sure, but in the memos that we received from agency counsel, it says this is attorney-client privilege. This memo is confidential and cannot be, at least that's how I interpret confidential, cannot and should not be shared. Could we share that? Because we, as commissioners, are agents of the Montana State Library, review those in executive session.
no. The only exception for reviewing legal opinions is if we are in litigation. So just seeking a legal opinion on a policy and sharing that legal opinion with you does not warrant a discussion in executive session.
But if we ask for legal counsel, how would that be given to the commission?
In a memo form, or you could invite an attorney to come and meet with you, but not in executive session. As was the case during our work session previously.
So if a singular commissioner would like to review the legal opinion, could they do that rather than having it in a joint commission meeting?
What I was advised is that I may share those legal opinions with you individually via email.
Then I believe then we could make that available. And I think that might fix or find the solution of what we're seeking at this point for more information. I think the manner of getting more information to feel comfortable with the vote, to make sure that that vote has validity behind it, would mean it would be incumbent upon the commissioners then to be able to reach for that. But it needs to be offered. It just can't be, if we don't know about it, we don't know what we don't know, right? So it has to be available for us to understand.
And also I encourage you, if when you are reviewing a draft policy or other kind of document, if you would like a legal opinion, please ask for it. You know, we don't have an attorney on staff and we have this MOU with Agency Legal Services, but it is difficult for us to provide good legal support to the agency right now. So the more you can request that when you think it's necessary, the more helpful that will be for us.
So I'm going to come back to just how I work within the Board of Public Ed, because I recommend things to them, and we have the same type of meeting schedule, of course, open meeting laws and everything else. So just in that discussion, I am seeking for them, rather than for in your case, Jenny, to have your staff present to the library, that we present in a partnership for goals. In other words, we choose the goals. This is what we're striving for. This is what we're working on. And that's what the library, then the great people that you have on staff would have that expertise to get us to that goal. And it might be a presentation that we need the counties in, or we need somebody else in to further that goal. I believe that in itself has really helped and aided the relationship between the board members on the Board of Public Ed, because again, there are a lot of new that have come on. Out of 7 members on the Board of Public Ed, 5 are now appointees of this current governor. So there's a lot of nuances. I think that really helps the staff recognize who they are, if we can all seek together to build up toward a goal. So that helps me in my time. I'm just going to talk about efficiencies of my time then. I see the agenda, I see that it's focused on the goal, and then I know I show up and my vote matters. Rather than something that is not dilatory in nature, but something that doesn't promote that success at the end. If that makes any sense.
So Elsie, let me make sure I understand. If in constructing the agenda, we can tie an agenda item back to one of our work plan objectives, is that what you're asking for?
Well, thank you, Jenny. I believe every single item on the agenda should be attributed to a goal. We should not be spending good people's time or state agency dollar or time of staff just to prepare an agenda because our bylaws says 6 times a year. We need to have pointed, directed agenda items, short and sweet, get them in, get them over with, get more information if we need, and accomplish the goal. And there could be multiple goals going at the same time, of course, with data outcome. That's a pointed direction of where budget can be then attributed to outcome.
Yeah. So I, like I was saying before, I think within the information that we're providing about these agenda items, we can be very clear about which particular goals the agenda items pertain to, so that's clear to the commission. Some of the agenda items are required by statute or other kinds of administrative purposes, and we can make that clear as well.
Yep. And I think that's a future view, because if they're annual reports or biennial reports, that should be upfront. And so I look at onboarding a lot, and especially, with the onboarding of new commissioners, not just current, but the ones that are going to come into the future. But I believe that's part of the onboarding package as well, knowing that in February, there's going to be a vote on a report before it goes to another committee or however those things are calendarized, so that the people that serve on the commission have a roadmap, not just on the goals, but what is statutorily required. And then I firmly believe that work is what drives the board. And that work then has a benefit because we see outcome at the end.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Oh, good. I was just going to say, I like the suggestion of kind of having a calendar of some of our more standard agenda items that the commission sees, so that that in June we review Federation plans of service, for example, by statute. In December we approve a land information plan, etc.
it demystifies what we do. In other words,
Yeah.
it's not that it's magical. It's not that it's routine either, but it does show the sense of accomplishment. And then I believe it will also, and I'll use the word believable, it'll put believability into the work that we do. And I'm not saying that there will never be spicy topics. I'm never saying that there will be challenges within personality or information flow or whatever. But I believe if a clear roadmap is given, it will aid in that communication with whatever rocky shores we land upon.
Chairman Dalton.
Commissioner Hall.
Yes, on the, I guess what I would say overall is that to Jenny, what I'm asking is that we be given all sides of all information so that we make really good decisions. I never want to feel like I'm being funneled in a direction by the information I receive. In this day and age, I will repeat, I need a legal opinion. I think there seems like if it's been given to you, I don't need it if it hasn't been given to you. But if it's part of the policy, and it may be that I appreciated what the superintendent said about, I think you have to help us a little. Sometimes I don't read through the policy and think, oh, they got a legal opinion on that. But if you got a legal opinion on something in a policy you're giving us, I would want an asterisk that says legal opinion can be provided. Legal opinion was sought, legal opinion available. That to me, I have to have that information. And so I guess I would just say in a free-flowing work session like this, please give us all the information that we need to be successful in what we do. If people come to us in the future, I was looking at it that way. If anyone comes to us and says, you realize that the majority of the staff was against this, that hasn't happened, it wouldn't happen with you, that I don't go, oh, I had no idea there'd been a staff vote. Just give me the information that I need to make a decision both ways and asterisk anything legal. And then I think that's all I need on agenda, but thank you.
Appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Thing if I could, and apologize, I'm not going through the chair. Sorry, Dalton, I apologize. Timing, do you have times on your agenda? Because I know in my busy schedule and in busy schedule of commissions, you start and then possibly finish. If you could be more articulate with timing, then I know I can zoom in or I can zoom up or I can do however to try to manage and we can hold feet to the fire on words said as well, that the presentation is 15 minutes and then we move on to the next one. If there could be more concerted effort on time, and I know that's out of my control, but if that could happen, I would be grateful.
Absolutely. I think we can all agree to, because the agenda does have an estimated time on it. Last agenda, we did go over into a few discussions, and I can commit to you as chair to try to work better about limiting ongoing communication and it's saying how many times do we talk about the situation before we, as we did last time, let's just put it to vote and let the process go. So I can commit to that, but I think the superintendent brings a good point that it's a shared effort by all of us, that the process works by each of us having the voice and vote, and we're put into this position for the responsibility. So let's do our jobs.
Agreed. And if I could add to this then, Chair, as well, that we don't want to ever limit anybody's thoughts or visits. These work sessions, I think, are helpful. I think it's a helpful move forward, especially with new commissioners. And I think that understanding of what the words mean and matter. But on the agenda itself, if there is an item that's up, then it's noted at the time. And then there is a constraint of time. And then Chair, you could say, we're 10 minutes over, or we're right on schedule. or we have lots more time for this. I think it also gives public the view of when they can also share in, because as a transparent part of government, we want to make sure that our patrons recognize that that agenda item is going to be heard at that time.
I can do that. I can bring red, yellow, and green note cards too for visual aids.
As a point of just working, I think that has to be reasonable too. I think that was for me, the problem with timing on the last meeting was one of perception. There was not enough time from my point of view for the evaluation process of the librarian. And it was too short a time, but there was a perception, I think, on the part of the people who brought in the review that it was going to be no discussion, we're just going to approve this. And when that didn't end up being the case, when there was a need for discussion, I think that led to that timeline being very unreasonable. So again, I don't think that, I thought that was an issue of perception of what the process was going to be. So that's one reason I thought we put this down as an agenda item on the bylaws, is
Yeah.
what kind of a process would be involved in that. I was very happy with the process when it was over. In fact, I personally thought it was extremely well spent time. I just felt like the agenda item was too short on time because it wasn't really a discussion item. It was just, here it is, accept it.
So what I haven't heard today is, how do we move forward when there is an item on the agenda as an information item? I'm hoping of information items, action items are only brought to the agenda after they've been vetted fully by the commission moving forward. But if there's an information item, when is it appropriate to have a second meeting like we've done here to prepare and discuss?
I guess I would like to suggest that anytime a commissioner feels like we need to have a more in-depth discussion before an item appears for action on the agenda, the staff is certainly open to that process.
Mr. Chairman,
Speak freely, Tom.
could we make that of course, the staff's always available and we appreciate that. Members of the commission might weigh in as to the appropriateness of further meeting with a motion and a vote.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Robin, I hear
Well-
you, but I don't see you.
Oh, don't you see me now? Oh,
I
well,
don't know what's going on.
oh, it's okay.
Robin.
Okay. There are times when there is a great deal of discussion, and I believe that a lot of times it is needed. And I agree that we need to have a time limit, but maybe we just need to rely on our chair to say, okay, I believe we have had enough discussion, or something like that, because there are times when we do need to discuss.
Okay.
So Mr. Chair, that does put a big responsibility on you, but you've got broad shoulders.
Well,
But
not just me, but future chairs and real, the chairs is appointed because of their history and knowledge.
Right.
We assume that's why they're appointed. But what I'm trying to say is the chair needs to be able to see the top of the iceberg and the iceberg below the water. And that's what you got to do in this determination, is what I'm hearing, Robin, is if there's stuff that's not on the surface that needs to be talked about, it's within the authority of the chair to say, we're going to have a special meeting at a later date to discuss this.
Right. Good.
So if I could aid this, if I could ask Genevieve, could you share your screen of what the previous agenda looked like? So we could kind of look at this in action.
Yes, give me 1 second.
And I don't want to delay or put time, you know, because all of our times are precious. But what I'm looking at is when the agenda is made, it's the reports that are put on. Do they have a time frame on them?
Go back. I don't think.
Not to limit our discussion as the board or
Oh,
the
yeah.
commission.
And then, yeah. Sorry, also give me one, they had to help me think of how I was gonna do this.
Mhm.
I'll get there in just a second. There you go. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Genevieve.
Oh, no, you're fine.
And then just scroll all the way to the bottom. Go to the
Something
second.
about being on camera that makes you suddenly forget how to do something you do all the time.
So on another note, is there a point on the agenda every time during the legislative session and afterwards that, Jenny, you'll be discussing the legislative actions?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Could we, as Mr. Chair, could we, as we discuss adding more details to having the evaluation, would it have to take part at a regular meeting or could it be a special session? So that, since it's closed anyway, or has a chance of being closed? Or could it be held like after a regular meeting and then following it or something? So,
I don't feel confident answering that question without asking a legal attorney. My understanding is executive sessions occur as part of a regularly scheduled meeting, but and I don't know if that regularly scheduled meeting could be this kind of work session format where it's still noticed as a public meeting. So that is potentially a possibility.
There are 2 points on which, Chairman Dalton, I have heard statements made that I'm not sure as a group we have agreed on. Tom made a really good point that if you want to, if you feel you need more information to make a decision. Am I on?
Yeah, you're
Yes,
fine.
Commissioner Hall. Tammy, you're muted now.
You're muted though.
Now, no?
You're back.
That thing. Okay, there are 2 points that have been made that I'm not sure we've reached agreement on. One is that Tom made a statement, if somebody wants to get more information, so something not be an action item, and I can only go on what we've done. I'm not going to do suppositions and anecdotal. For example, when Tom and I wanted the legal opinion on the children's protection or rights, we made a motion, we took a second, it was defeated, so we went ahead and took action. Tom, is anybody saying that if somebody needs more information to make the decision, it should be postponed? I hear Jenny saying, if you ask, we'll take it off for a further action meeting. I hear Peggy asking, when could we do that meeting, or Robin? But I'm not sure we agree that if people want more information before they make a decision how do we go about doing that? Because I was not comfortable making that decision without legal opinion, which in our hands, which is why I voted no, but that's okay. What are you saying, Tom?
Seems like everything in committee is done by motion and vote.
Okay,
We could set up a further meeting if we felt that we needed an hour or 2 hours to deal with something or to get more information. So we're an organic entity. We can do what we please within the limits of the law and our bylaws. we can call
Okay.
another meeting if we felt necessary, but if a majority of the committee did not agree.
They
then-
did not, and that's the way it goes. Okay,
Chair Dalton, can I make a comment?
Please do.
I believe you can do a motion to table, and you can say the time that you're, at any time during a motion, Tommy can correct me, but so at any time, someone can do a motion to table, and then definitely or indefinitely. Definitely, then you can say when you're tabling it until, and then at that point, I believe you could recommend a work session or not a work session, but a meeting at another date or the next commission meeting. And then the commission can take a vote on whether they agree with that motion.
Sherman?
and then the second question that was asked that I'm not sure. I thought with the superintendent was saying, is the timeline, I'm going to use the example of when we had the logo meeting with the legal system. And we had set up an hour with the attorney, but Jenny's presentation took 25-30 minutes of that. 25 minutes. So we really didn't have, we finally got to the actual asking of questions or talking to the lawyer at 1:35, and the meeting was supposed to go till 2. So that I think goes back to what you were talking about, Superintendent, is if we set up a timeline of an hour to get an input from the attorney, but we use 35 minutes before we even get to the attorney, that may require, that's a clarity issue. So that, again, I'm not going to do anecdotal, I'm going to use examples. Is that what you're talking about, Superintendent? Or was I off base here? Or not that example, but that situation?
Superintendent Arnson, are you there?
You're muted, just so you know. Not sure.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Dalton. So again, I don't want to limit anybody that a commissioner has the opportunity to do. I agree with Tom. Simple is better. Simple vote of anything with it. But I don't think you can limit information. Did that answer your question, Tammy?
Tammy, you're muted.
So here, I also, for me, that was a problem with the initial logo, is that we had an hour timeline, but the presentation again from staff was 35 minutes. So I don't know that we always have timelines that allow for discussion. So I'm just throwing that out there, is that
So,
that's not a criticism. I don't
me
want that to be sounding like a criticism. Please forgive me if it sounds that way. I'm just trying for clarification that the timelines
Mhm.
be representative of our time to ask questions and respond.
so, let me ask a question. So this is the December agenda. We have sort of broad blocks of time, like there was just short of an hour for the executive session. I think we ended up taking like an hour and 20 minutes. And then large blocks, would you rather see time for each agenda item to give us a better chance to manage the agenda?
Jenny, I think what I would like to see is, I'll use the e-resources policy, for example. In October, we received that as an information item. We asked questions there, and we asked questions again in December. In December, it was an action item. I would support increasing the time for information items, and then increasing the time for the commissioners to ask questions and assign staff to research our responses. And then at the action item, I think that's the time where we actually need the staff to prepare and design a full report based on the information that was requested at the last meeting.
And then the other thing I would say is, if an item is informational and you would like it to appear as informational on either a special meeting or a subsequent agenda, please ask. And if an item is an action item and you don't feel like you're sufficiently ready to take action, or you need more information from staff, please table the agenda item and ask for it to appear on a subsequent agenda. That is the process, and we want you to feel comfortable taking action as necessary, and that is your right as commissioners. Speaking of time, it's past 2:30. Do you have time to stay on for some additional discussion?
I do.
I'm fine.
Yep,
I
go ahead.
I can
I
stay.
thought it was scheduled till 3:30.
Yeah, and I need to jump. The only thing that I could say to add to this, more communication means a better commission, is to say that maybe the agenda is sent out with a draft on it, and within 48 hours, or it's incumbent upon the commissioners if they have a question, or if they have something before the agenda gets posted, that it is incumbent upon them to ask questions, or to ask for its removal, or to ask for its amendment, or however it might be, augmenting it more time, putting more context to it. And I think that might be another way to aid communication in more of a preventative mode, but also in a proactive mode.
Superintendent, is that what you do with the Board of Education?
I do.
Okay,
In fact, I send them like 300 pages of documents. And then they have 8 days prior to their posting on their website that's public. And then I reach to them as soon as they have, this is the executive director, the chair, and the vice chair. And I then visit with them. Did I do it right? Did they need more information? Did they need less? And that way it's a communication between the board and who I then recommend all of my discussion points with them. My work is different than what the state library does within some sphere, but very, very similar as well. But I firmly believe that more communication and having it be owned by the commission. So in other words, it's not just that you feed us. We also have to chew it and think about it and digest it, if I use that same analogy. But I
Thank
do
you for
have
your
to
time.
jump. I do have to jump. Everyone, blessings. Let me just say, it's how many days are we into the session? Maybe full 3 week by tomorrow. I'm going to say Happy New Year to everyone until December 31st, because there's hope. So anyway, blessings to you all. Stay well. We'll talk again. Thank you.
Nancy?
Bye, Superintendent. I just want to let everyone recognize that I think we've had a really productive and good meeting. So I hope that everyone feels the same way as I do. We have talked about commission bylaws, briefly talked about duties of the commission board chair and commission. With these drafts to policy, Jenny, how is policy going to be, draft policy going to be presented at the next meeting? As an
So-
information or an action item?
So at this point, I do have one more point of discussion about the bylaws that I'd like to bring up, but
Okay.
based on our discussion, I'm not hearing any suggested changes to the bylaws in terms of discussion about agenda setting or meeting content. Is that true? Did I miss anything? It sounds like you're comfortable with current practice without having that documented in the bylaws.
only have a question about this. Did you feel we needed an objective? I noticed all the other bylaws and the other Board of Regents, et cetera, had an objective, and I know the superintendent mentioned it. Is it, do we need an objective for in the bylaws, Tom? Is that typical?
Mr. Chair, I think there's 2 lines of objective in the bylaws or in the establishing, in the statute that establishes us. Maybe
Thank
that's
you.
sufficient.
Okay,
Yeah. So in terms of the bylaws,
thank you.
I have one more point I'd like to discuss, but in terms of the agenda, because we've had the opportunity to discuss it here, I would suggest bringing these changes as an action item in February, if you're comfortable. Again, if you're not comfortable taking action at that meeting, you can always table and request it at your April meeting. But if you are comfortable, then that would give you the opportunity to adopt the addition of the objective and the change I want to talk about here. I do want to work on a public participation policy. And we will not be ready to ask for action for that policy at your February meeting. So it would be brought to you as a draft policy for discussion at your February meeting, and then we would request action at your April meeting. And you know, the public participation policy is somewhat based on our conversations with Dan Clark, where we actually have in policy information about the process through which we provide public notice about our meetings, how the public can submit written comment, the process for taking public comment during our meetings, the fact that our meetings are made available through an online platform. One of the things I think is important for that policy is that people identify themselves in Zoom, for example, so that we have a record of who is in attendance, and some of those kinds of details. So, as I said, I would like to, based on some of the information that's provided in some of these other example policies, bring a draft policy for further discussion in February, followed by action at a later meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Please, Tom.
I'm going to go back to the discussion we had at the very beginning of this meeting. As I read through some of those public participation guidelines that, I remember Great Falls was one and North Valley. So the question came in my mind, do we need one of these? Public meetings can get kind of raucous at times. And my somewhat hands-off temperament applies to this discussion as well. Robert's Rules of Order gives the chair the authority to manage meetings. And I see a fair amount of invitation to public attendance in the emails that you send out, notifying of the meeting and how to participate, and a few guidelines. I'm in favor of relieving the staff of spending any more time on this, and just go with practice. And if we find that things are out of control and we have to adopt something like that boilerplate that we see from other places, school boards and other commissions, we can do it at that time.
Chairman, I had, under the notes I took, there is one thing that I want to go back and address later, and that's committee appointments. I had under public input, of course, they can only make input into agenda items only. I thought the public rules from Great Falls were a little too extensive. The Great Falls public.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, they were too
Yes.
expensive for me. I felt like they were restrictive, but I didn't know. I find that people do not know they can give input, that I mean, the people you reach to do. But the general public, I have found has no clue that they can listen in these meetings or whatever. I don't know how we address that.
Well,
And
we
Tom
asked for
will-
public comment.
Right, but I mean, the general public out there who is concerned about libraries, who call me or talk to me, I say, well, you know, our meetings are public, you can Zoom in, you can make public comment, and they are pretty much shocked by that. So I don't know if that's part of our education process.
Mhm.
I think when we go forward with this big education process, that would be a really
Good point,
important thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is let the public know that's an availability to them. My question revolved around staff input at board meetings. I want to hear from the staff. I think it's really important. I want to start that and I want to make sure that's clear. I want to hear from the staff. I think it's really important. But I have found that at these really controversial meetings, we tend to only hear from staff and retired staff. And if staff disagreed with the leadership of the staff, which would be you, Jenny, and your executive team, would they come to us that way? Or is that only the staff that supports what's before us? I really don't know the answer to that. I feel like most of the time, the staff is rallying what we are doing or what's in front of us, which is great. I mean, I think their opinions are important.
Tammy, you raise a really good point, and part of this is, which we need to raise to our attention as vote makers, are ensuring that staff are providing us information only in their capacity, and they're not swaying us to vote. I'm concerned mainly by Hatch Act provisions. If a staff member is using their capacity in their role, encouraging us to vote in favor of something that would be violating those rules.
So let me give you an example and we can talk through how we might address it. In June, when we presented the logo, I'm not sure which commissioner it was, a commissioner asked for the staff's opinion, which is different than information. Obviously staff need to be able to provide information, but I think the question is, how do they provide their opinion when the commission wants to hear the staff's opinion? And I would hope that staff would feel comfortable coming to a commission meeting and sharing their opinion. Elsie had suggested to me that perhaps in the instance of the logo, we do an anonymous staff survey to give the commission the staff's opinions without having staff leadership filter those opinions. We're open to your suggestions on how to handle staff opinion versus staff information and expertise that they're bringing in their roles as staff.
Jenny, let me make it clear. My concern is partly for you. The many commissions and boards I've served on, there's a chain of command. And there has to be a real balance there with staff freedom. But I'm not sure, we haven't had this problem because every time we've had a public meeting, the staff is rallying around in great numbers what's before us. So it's not a problem, but I'm not sure I understand what the superintendent was saying to you. I think there has to be a real careful protection of the librarian and the executive staff, that staff members do not go around the chain of command and come directly to the commissioner with things. Is that not fit this structure at all? Help me understand that. Am I adequate?
Yeah, and I had this conversation with Tom recently. I am comfortable with staff communicating with commissioners, especially about informational matters, work questions. Staff are usually really good about CCing me on any kinds of email communication. We have had instances in the past where a staff member has disagreed with the commission. We had a lengthy discussion when we were talking about the oversight of our natural heritage program a number of years ago, where there was a lot of staff input that came down on both sides of that matter. So, I think the staff are appropriate and respectful and professional in sharing their opinions. So I'm not too uncomfortable with the idea of staff coming and sharing their opinions and know that they would do so professionally. I think one of the concerns that's been expressed to me is that the commission might not feel like staff are expressing their true opinions to you, that I am somehow a filter for that, or somehow impeding that kind of information. And I want you to know that if you feel like you need to get that, some kind of truer representation, we're open to mechanisms to allow that to happen.
Tammy, were there any other items that you've had to bring forward? Tammy, you're muted.
Trying to be respectful here. Back to Tom's comment. Tom, are you suggesting that we don't have the staff worry about bringing that forward? I would support Tom's idea that the staff doesn't need to spend more time on that, but that would be probably a function when we talk about the work of the not logo committee. We don't call it that. It's the information videos, et cetera, we're putting out to the public, that we let them know we're seeking their feedback. There are methods to use. That to me is a real important part of that information packet. I would agree, Tom. I don't know that we need more time on public input rules, except to make sure the staff is sensitive to the fact that I don't want to feel just pressured and without information, but just numbers of people coming forth and saying, there's nothing new to add from what you have, but this. So I would support Tom in that, but I can't make that decision. That's just the two of us. My point was on committee assignments. I did notice the Board of Regents had all appointments are made by the chair, except if the board decides to appoint within themselves. And I think we've had cases on work committees, Dalton, where you have said, would someone like to serve on this work committee? And I noticed that, for work committees, not standing, I think all standing committees you appoint, but for work things that we set aside, I think it's nice to be able to ask for volunteers.
Absolutely.
Jenny, I have a question, and
Yeah.
Chairman, does the staff feel that we need more a policy, or are you happy with sticking with? I don't know if there have been any issues. Are you happy with sticking with just a more of a general practice of what we have?
I'm looking to Genevieve too. I think current practice works well. The only thing, and I think we could say this, and I don't think we would get any real pushback, is that on Zoom, when people log in, they have to identify themselves. I would like permission to remove someone if they're not.
I asked about that.
Okay, oh, good.
I asked the gal who teaches the Roberts rules for the, and she said, just like if they walk in the room, they don't have to sign that piece of paper. Technically, you don't have to ask them to You can ask, but you can't demand. Is what, because I said sometimes people join, they stay anonymous
If
or.
they comment though, we have to.
That's what I was gonna ask, because you guys spend way more time, if they comment, like if you comment at there at the Capitol, you have, yes.
to say.
But if you're just joining the meeting, she said, just like anyone can walk in and just
Okay.
choose to write, what, anyways, that's because I had said, do I have the right to say you have to provide me your name and number, or name or city, and she said no, but public comment,
Okay,
yes.
So we don't need to do anything.
okay, yeah, then I guess I'm comfortable with practice.
Okay. Tammy, you're muted. Still
Who
muted.
was talking about they
Oh,
talked.
I was
about-
Genevieve,
Genevieve. Okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't see who was talking.
I think you froze, let me stop.
Yeah. If we have just a couple,
Jenny, you just cut out.
Is everything cut out? Oh, no. We've lost them, the main people.
They're gone.
Well, while I have all of you here,
Yeah.
is it my understanding that there will be no action items brought forward to the February commission meeting for the bylaws?
That was my impression.
Yeah.
My
No
impression is-
changes or anything. Don't we have to review them?
We can review them, but there's going to be no action to change them.
Right.
Right.
The other question is, we did want to, where or if we need to add information about the state librarian's evaluation.
Oh.
Or can that be part of the guidelines? Are the guidelines part of the bylaws, or are they just separate?
Can you remind me what we wanted to change? Or
We wanted to say who did it. There's
right,
nothing in admin rule that says agency directors are reviewed. Advice from the lieutenant governor was it's in your best interest to create some type of guidelines that say how you do this moving forward.
I'll be back on. Sorry, guys. Well, can you hear us?
Mhm.
We can now.
But I can't see, so I need to know who's talking.
We can ask, but we don't need to know. I think that's what we were just told about public comment.
I don't think we're going to know because I think they're
I
gone
think we
again.
lost them again. Yes,
Yep,
we lost
did.
our audio. 1 second. We lost them again.
From what I understood.
Can you guys
people
hear us
have to
now?
adapt-
Yep.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Hang in
help
there.
me clarify this. You don't have to notify who you are to be in the public meeting. But I think if you're going to speak, you have to tell people who you are. Isn't that true?
I mean, I think that's the respectful thing to do.
I think it's required.
If they're commenting, they would have to, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Tom,
we're
is- you're
back.
not.
Can
Yeah,
you guys
that's
hear
what
us?
Yes.
Okay, we're just gonna keep going like this. Okay.
we could tell that you guys were in a rich discussion, but we missed most of it. It
Well, we
sounds
gave
like-
the farm away.
So is there consensus that we do not need to move forward with the public participation policy?
It sounds
Yes.
like there's no need for any action items on the bylaws, but we need to make operating guidelines for the state librarian's performance evaluation.
Okay,
And again, Jenny, if people do not have to say who they are when they join the meeting, but before they speak, they need to tell us who they are.
yes, yes.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Good. So I do have one suggested change for the bylaws and perhaps this will help with the operating guidelines. I would like to propose that the finance committee be modified to be the Finance and Human Resources Committee. And that committee would then be responsible for creating the operating guidelines for the state librarian's evaluation and be responsible for that work. The other reason I think that that's maybe an appropriate change is that it is the finance committee that sees other proposals like changes to the broadband pay plan, pay incentives, other kinds of salary changes. We've brought those to the finance committee in the past because they have finance related relevance, but they also have human resources related relevance. And then Tom had a great question recently about staff morale. And I'm really interested in doing more to help the commission understand the nature of the staff that we have, questions about staff morale. I think it would be helpful for the commission to have a window into seeing things about how well we are doing in achieving the objectives of our broadband pay plan policy, turnover in staff vacancy, that kind of thing. And it seems like this committee could be a venue for sharing that kind of information and getting feedback from the commission in a meaningful way.
Jenny, I really like that, and it mirrors the discussion that we had at last month, or I guess back in December, about finding a solution for how to get this work done, but doing it in a way that isn't taking away all of our time.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Tom.
did you say that there is no requirement in law or administrative rule for us to evaluate?
No,
So this is us taking on an additional responsibility?
I want to ask Sharon about that. Sharon, I know you're with us. Is there a requirement in state policy for state employees to be evaluated? Do you have that information?
I don't know that it is a requirement. It falls more under the practice and the expectation that employees are being evaluated. I don't know that there is any requirement or policy for department agency leads to be evaluated.
Sure. Maybe we should find that out.
that's there is a policy. I have it open on my screen. If I worked for the state, I'd know how to tell you what it was called or where it was, but it's the performance management and evaluation policy.
Let me look here.
And traditionally, it's been a pretty informal process, just that occurred. And so with the help of Dalton and Sharon, we were working to firm up and make more of a formal process for evaluation.
Yeah, and in the policy, it says agency managers will evaluate employees on their performance. The problem is we aren't. Who is Jenny's agency manager? And that's the commission.
And the commission hires the state librarian.
So do we need to put it into policy, or do we say it's already in policy? Excuse me, not policy, operating guidelines.
Mr. Chairman,
Please, Tom.
I would suggest that there be somewhat in violation of my previous sentiments about letting things go naturally, that this is probably an area that should be somewhat formalized. because of the gravity of it. And so I would recommend that several of us, whether it's the finance committee or another group, look into best ways of evaluating and then propose something to the committee, the commission.
I would support Tom's concept. I think it's very important. I think we do need it. I do not support having the finance committee be the same committee that evaluates. I think that the finance committee has a different goal, different talents. I don't think it's as comfortable a fit as maybe some people do.
Tammy,
like to-
I don't think Jenny's proposal is to have the subcommittee do the evaluation. I think it's for the subcommittee to design the policy or the process.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It would still come back to the full commission. But what we have to do is have someone other than the state librarian has to define how the state librarian is getting evaluated.
Okay, so you're saying, Jenny, your suggestion was for the study of evaluation process, not for the actual evaluation process.
Correct.
Okay, I think we need a subcommittee that can study that. That's what I think. I think that we need that, and I would agree. Okay.
Are you guys in support of HR, finance, administration being combined into a subcommittee? I shouldn't say administration, but I just look at it all succinctly, proposing that we change the bylaws to say HR and finance subcommittee.
No, we're not doing that today, right?
No,
We're
not today, no, but we're just, that was a proposed action item for the next meeting.
But I thought you just said that wasn't. I thought you were saying Jenny was not proposing. Anyway, I'm
We're not proposing the performance evaluation. We're proposing expanding the authority of the subcommittee.
Yeah, and the definition of that committee.
Or do you want to separate HR?
I think it's a very big issue. I think it's one of the most important things we do. I think there are two separate foundations the board has to do. I think one of them is the evaluation, hiring and evaluation of the lawyer, of the librarian, and the other is the fiscal policy. And I think they should stay as two separate committees.
I
So-
just want to emphasize that I think an HR committee's role goes beyond just evaluating the state librarian. It's
I do
in having a window into our human resource metrics as an agency and how well we're doing as an agency in supporting our staff.
Well,
I know
I have
we're
a point.
strapped for time, guys. I think we're already 36 minutes over.
1 point.
No, we're not.
Subcommittees number 6B says additional standing committees may be formed by the State Library Commission by amending the bylaws. That's what she's talking about, is to maybe perhaps just to set up that HR subcommittee, we would need to amend these bylaws. So if we want to have that, or can it be just set as it sounds like you want it to be more than a temporary subcommittee.
I think there's value in that. I'm curious the commission's thoughts.
I agree that there should be an HR committee, but I'm questioning attaching it to the finance committee. That's my question.
As serving on the member of the Board of Regents, policy, finance, and administration were all combined in a subcommittee.
This is Melissa, and I'll just add that most of the time, or a lot of the time, those topics do overlap. And so in my mind, this recommendation is logical.
Because the HR includes the salaries, is that why?
Exactly, that's a lot of it, like when we're talking about budgeting, when that
Okay.
time of the year comes, a lot of that and the policy that we implement, the pay plan policy, those kinds of things, they're all intertwined.
Okay, so you're saying that the HR is more for the salary side rather than the interpersonal relationship side? Is that pretty much what?
Yeah,
You're
I would
saying-
say so, and we, like, so we wouldn't bring any staff HR issues to this committee,
Okay.
that's certainly not the purpose of
Okay.
that at all.
Okay,
Again, we're not talking staff, we're talking the evaluation of our. I think we have to bring the, Dalton, will you clarify again, was this meeting set to go to 3:30 or 2:30?
No, it actually doesn't have an end. I foolishly only scheduled myself an hour for the meeting, so
Okay, because I had down that it was 3:30, okay.
Chairman, may I speak?
please.
So if we are merging finance and HR, maybe we could define their roles within that merge, just so everyone's clear on what's happening.
that's a good suggestion, Patricia.
So instead of having an action item, it could be brought forward as an information item.
I think it definitely has to be an information item. I think we need to hear all sides of it. I think we need to know what's available, what is recommended, what other groups do. What are the standing committees now are the finance? And
Just the finance, that's the
Yeah.
only one.
I still think that's too much. I don't want to say power, but information, research, et cetera, in just one small committee of this commission. I think that's a bad idea.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we should have a motion.
Can we? Do we need to have a motion to direct staff to bring information forward?
I think in a work session, it's not as an action item.
So let me clarify what I'm hearing. It would be helpful for the commission for the staff to bring forward a charge for the work and role of a human resources committee, including examples of what that committee would be responsible for. And then the commission can determine, regardless, well, the commission can determine if a subcommittee is warranted. And if a subcommittee is warranted, that then would require an action item to amend your bylaws to create that subcommittee or add those responsibilities to the finance committee, whichever the commission prefers.
That sounds correct.
Is that helpful? Okay.
I also want to encourage other commissioners. I heard Tammy say earlier in a different thread that if we are interested in serving in our capacities or even proposing additional committees, bring those conversations forward, because we don't know what we don't know. And I encourage, and not just myself, but I know Jenny and staff also encourage and welcome conversation and feedback. So continue this good work.
Okay, so I just want to double check my work items coming out of this meeting. We're not going to propose any immediate changes to the bylaws. We are not going to bring forward a public participation policy, but for your February meeting, we will bring information about the tentative charge, potential charge for an HR committee. And some examples of how other boards handle these kinds of roles for the commission to consider.
That is my understanding.
Yes. That sounds correct.
And before we go, I want to thank Dalton for doing an incredible job today.
Thanks, Tammy.
No, I thought it was great. Go ahead, Tom.
I concur, and I'd like to suggest a limiting on or some confinements on what the staff brings forward. I'd like to see this evaluation thing separated from the more esoteric things about how well the leadership of the agency does in maintaining morale. That's a great subject, but I'd like to see us come up with a process for evaluating
Yes,
that.
narrow.
So that I'm clear, what I would propose is I will bring forward, recommendations for the scope of the Human Resources Committee. One task or responsibility of that committee will be to create that evaluation framework. I'm not planning to prepare anything. That would be up to this committee to
Mhm.
determine. Is that? Okay.
That sounds
okay.
right.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that all of us read the performance and management evaluation policy that you have found in the meantime.
It's in the chat.
There's a link in chat.
Correct.
Okay, I can't find chat.
I can't
I'll
do
email-
that. Would you email
I
it?
can email it to you guys, yeah. I'll do
Thank
that
you.
right now.
Thank
Great.
you.
Yeah.
Come back to it.
Yes, thank you. I'll add it to the meeting materials, and if ever you need to, if you ever go back to this meeting's meeting materials, it'll be a link there directly to it. So I'll do both.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Jenny, you spoke of the biennium goals and the work plan objectives. I'm sure that that's been sent to me somewhere, but could you send it again, please?
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.
And I did tell Genevieve, I'll tell the rest of you, I am not able to get that address working with the state address. And so until we get over there on February 4th, just use my old address, please, for anything email.
Yeah, I've just been doing both for everybody for our type of internal meeting stuff. You know, that way if I know, obviously you check your personal email a little more often, so.
Anything else we need, do you think, Dalton?
I don't think we do. I think Jenny has direction. At least I understand she has direction to just bring one proposal to the next to the February meeting as information. But there's no action item regarding our bylaws or operating principles at this time. Jenny, do you need any clarifying
I
information?
don't think so. I think I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other action to be discussed today? Hearing none, I'll call for public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to make comment? Was there any chat in today's session?
No.
Hearing no public comment and no further action, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you.
guys. Be well.